kind of no matter where you look, there's a strong association with an increase in amount of steps to a decrease in all-cause mortality, a decrease in cardiovascular disease mortality.
This is Generation Health. Each week, we bring you the latest in news, cutting-edge research, and time-tested best practices, helping you live a longer, healthier life. Sitting across from me, Mr. Dante DiMatteo, PharmD, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. How are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
Wow. That was a high five.
I got...
You get nothing. You're way back there.
Air fives.
That's Josiah Schweinberg, our engineer. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well.
It's been a rough morning.
It has.
We're going to get here.
I feel like I'm not doing my job well.
No. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. We're going to call some people. We're going to make some phone calls.
We're going to call the higher ups.
Taken care of. Absolutely. My name is Tyler Andrews. I am the host. Dante, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about step counters.
Yeah.
And we're also talking about parenting through Halloween.
Yes, that's today. Happy Halloween, everybody. Or not. If you don't celebrate it, then nothing for you. Happy All Saints Day tomorrow. But first, can I share some news of what's happening behind the counter?
Please.
Awesome. Our bodies are host to billions of different bacteria. In our mouths, that bacteria feasts upon sugars that we eat and form films that coat the surface of teeth, eventually leading to plaques and cavities. Israeli researchers have discovered a naturally occurring molecule called diindolylmethane, I think, also known as indole or DIM, which is what we'll be calling it for the rest of this bit here, reduces the development of those biofilms by up to 92%. DIM is a metabolite of an amino acid called tryptophan. You may have heard that. The researchers believe that this could be easily added to toothpaste and mouthwash to radically improve dental hygiene. This is early research, but keep your eyes peeled in the coming years. If this research is confirmed, it's only a matter of time until you see this on labels right next to fluoride, which could be even better because our second story here, a new study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association concludes that management of dental disease and good oral care may prevent heart failure in people with type 2 diabetes. The study was conducted in South Korea and looked at 173,000 participants with type 2 diabetes over a 9-year period. The researchers looked at a bunch of different factors like presence of periodontal disease, frequency of brushing, and how often their teeth were professionally cleaned. In the end, the researchers found that better hygiene care was associated with a decreased risk of heart failure, even when accounting for other factors like missing teeth and periodontal disease. Dental diseases have been shown to cause systemic inflammation, which contributes to atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Additionally, bacterial toxins in the mouth have been associated with increased LDL cholesterol. While this study looked specifically at type 2 diabetics, it's safe to assume that many of these results will carry over to the general population. Also, people are more likely to kiss you if you have good oral care, so that's, important. Brush your teeth. Dante, when was the last time you brushed your teeth?
Oh man, it's been a while.
No, don't say that. That's not true.
It was just a few hours ago.
Okay. All right.
How about you?
Yeah, it was after I finished my coffee this morning. All right. Enough of that silliness. Dante, let's talk about step counters.
Let's do it. First and foremost, there are endless metrics that we can track and monitor over time with respect to health and lifestyle. Some are more useful than others. This is one that when we talk about it, we'll see can be tracked fairly reliably, fairly accurately. And so because of that, I think that even though there's a little nuance, this is something that we can help you piece together in terms of all the other things you're thinking about with respect to health.
So this is these are things that people get these on their wearables, like a smartwatch, right? And then a lot of cell phones I know track to some degree, but I guess we'll get into it, how accurate all of that is and all that. I have enjoyed looking at that. I know my father-in-law used to be obsessed with closing his rings every day. So you're saying this is a useful tool to some degree?
I believe it is. Because, for example, when in the past when we've talked about the different metrics that a wearable will track.
Yeah.
It seems like people's most favorite thing to look at is how many calories they burn. And so that was one that we at least discussed isn't the most accurate. It's not the most reliable. So as entertaining as it might be to track, the technology is not there to track sort of the natural variance that would occur in energy expenditure from day to day. To kind of, launch us into this, we can look at step counting, and we can look at pedometers from a historical perspective. And so initially the use of pedometers was used primarily as a means to measure distance. This dates all the way back to Leonardo da Vinci, who is often credited with the invention of the first mechanical iteration of a pedometer.
No kidding.
Yeah, so the 1500s.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, it was a fascinating device. It was something that started on his waist and then I believe connected down to his leg, and so
it was a wearable.
It was a true wearable.
It was a wearable.
He was an actual genius.
He was.
That's amazing.
So we mentioned pedometers. Pedometers are literally just measuring our step count, either mechanically or electronically by detecting motion.
Yeah.
Now, historically speaking, if we fast forward quite a bit, the scope of pedometer use shifted towards physical activity tracking versus this simple means to track distance for measurement. So we were tracking distance for a while with it. Still tracking distance, just that's inherently what it's doing.
Right.
But what can this mean from a physical activity perspective?
Right.
So
we're no longer as concerned with the actual distance. It's not about saying that's 2.4 miles away.
Right.
It's about what that represents in terms of your activity level.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so this next segment here is sort of where the controversy lies.
Yeah.
In a lot of the recommendations.
Okay.
Or the primary recommendation for step count, where that sort of stems from.
I love a good controversy.
So controversial. So the actual 10,000 steps per day slogan,
I have heard that.
sort of that slogan, that recommendation, it actually came from Japan in the 1960s around the time of the Tokyo Olympics. And it was utilized to promote increased physical activity to the public with the goal of decreasing cardiovascular disease.
Oh.
So it was a good thought. 10,000. Yeah, it was a noble cause.
Yeah.
10,000 is a clean number.
Yes.
It worked.
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily based on the most black and white data. The data that we have in 2023 is a lot clearer, I think, than it was in those days.
I should hope so. That was 60 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to this messaging, the Yamasa company, they essentially designed a pedometer to go along with this messaging.
Makes sense.
And so the name of it in English literally meant 10,000 steps meter. And so it just was a nice, nice way to make a little money and promote physical activity. And so a lot of the research today to figure out the requisite number of steps per day, per week, that would elicit health benefits, they've set out to try and question or confirm or deny this 10,000, this sort of arbitrary 10,000 step goal, so to speak.
So the 10,000 is an arbitrary number.
Essentially,
it's not a magic number, but we have to start somewhere. So that's where we started.
Moving forward, how steps are measured and how accurate a device is, a pedometer is, will depend on the specific device that's being used.
Right.
And so here are the general categories that are found in, commercially available products and also in the literature. So waist-worn spring-levered devices, as you can tell, were mechanical based.
Right.
Those have since fallen out of favor. Waist-worn.
That's your Da Vinci style.
Da Vinci style, yeah.
Got it.
You might be able to find them. There might be
if you're really into counting your steps, that might be still there.
Yeah.
All right.
So this next term that I'm going to introduce here, waist-worn accelerometers.
Okay.
The direction of accelerometers is where the technology currently sits.
Yep.
And accelerometers are used with other different aspects of
Sure.
what's found in a phone or in a wearable.
Yep.
But that's the shift, I would say. So the ones that were on the waist, worn on the waist, are very accurate. There are also accelerometers that can be carried in pants pockets. Sounds like a smartphone.
Yep.
Those that can be strapped to the thigh, worn around the ankle, on the foot, or in the shoe, and also most commonly, which we see now, on the wrist by way of an actual wearable or a watch.
Okay.
So not to get too technical, accelerometers literally measure changes in velocity on a given axis. And so that's how it determines to what extent you're stepping or moving.
Right.
In order to enhance the accuracy and enhance the data that's given to the consumer or the researcher, they're now being coupled with different microsensors, GPS, and other higher end technology and software that, isn't, so you're not getting information just from the accelerometer. You're also getting it based upon GPS, which is telling you the distance. You can then calibrate these devices manually.
Right.
There's all these different things that, while the accelerometer is the main piece that's tracking your steps, there's all sorts of stuff going on behind the scenes.
A 3% change here and a 2% change there can eventually add up to a real difference. I mean, it could make a difference.
And it's essentially added up to now what we have today.
And that makes sense, because I've noticed that I don't wear a wearable at the moment, but with my phone, of course, my phone is tracking my steps anyway, because it tracks everything in a super creepy sort of way. But I've noticed that if I just have it in my pocket and I go for a walk, which is about a 3-mile walk, it catches about half my steps, it seems like. But if I tell it in the little app, hey, I'm going for a walk and I'm starting now, it catches all of them, and it kicks out, whatever 8, 9, 10,000 steps, whatever it is that I've done.
That's an interesting point, because in a lot of the research that's out there, when essentially measuring the accuracy and the validity of a different device, they'll often distinguish 2 different settings: free living measurements and controlled settings. Free living and controlled. So in your case, if you were to just throw your phone in your pocket, run outside, walk for a few miles, your phone or your watch, it can sort of dictate, like, again, based on other factors. If you had a watch with it, it would sense that your heart rate was elevated. It might ask you if you were working out. That plays a role too. But in your case, it was just your phone. It kind of wasn't able to distinguish, is this activities of daily living, or now are you out actually
doing a thing?
Yeah. So yes, ultimately telling your watch, telling your phone that you're going for a walk is a huge way to ensure accuracy if you are really trying to get down to the minutia.
Fair enough. So regardless of whether you've got it on active mode or whatever, it's still relatively accurate. Okay.
And so based upon that, there are some common themes found in these studies. So again, with respect to validity and reliability, I still think some of the accuracy stuff is useful to talk about, but to package it up neatly, for the most part in the literature, we see more underestimating of steps versus overestimating.
Yeah.
So for example, energy expenditure, how many calories we burn, we see the opposite. We see, we see certain devices telling people that they burned 80, 90, 75% more calories than they actually burn on a given exercise. So then that causes them to change their behavior in other ways with their diet, all that sort of stuff. These do the opposite. They underestimate it. So
if anything, I think that would be the way to...
That's the way to do it.
If you're going to do one or the other.
Yeah. And so there was, within that, there was one trial that specifically looked at 7-day iPhone step counting versus a validated pedometer. Again, underestimating was the main issue. And it was the main issue primarily because of seldom carriers, they called it. So individuals who went out for a walk, but they forgot to grab their phone, which is another huge limiter.
Yeah.
Again, if you're, or not thinking about tracking your every movement or your every behavior.
You work behind a counter and you're on your feet and you're running around picking up medications and back and forth and back and forth. And if you don't have your phone in your pocket, if it's sitting on the counter, it's not tracking any of that movement. So I can see how that would quickly change things.
Yeah. Now, there are certainly cases where overestimating occurs. It was mainly in the mechanical devices that were used.
Oh.
There was literally like not a lever, almost like a pendulum in these devices that sometimes it would double count steps, or you could game the mechanical ones more easily, like we used to do in gym class.
Yes,
you'd count your steps, and you'd take a break and you'd like sit in the corner and just like shake
it. Wow.
You remember those?
You guys had different
While they were talking,
classes.
you're just like standing there like, Anyway, in that specific study, they found a 12% lower step count in the iPhone users versus the validated pedometer.
Okay. All right.
So you can keep some of those numbers in mind. 12%, it's not the end of the world.
Right. They're relatively accurate. They're ubiquitous. Everybody has a cell phone, or many of us have wearables as well. Everybody's got them. That's wonderful. But other than knowing that I've walked a whole lot today, why do I care? What differences does this actually make in my life? Does it really mean that I'm going to be healthier?
Because step counting is an indirect measure of physical activity, it's very easy to measure, as we've determined. You can measure it up to 10 to 15% accurately.
Passively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, we care about it because it's a very crude, indirect way to figure out how much people are moving. And so generally speaking, kind of no matter where you look, there's a strong association with an increase in amount of steps to a decrease in all-cause mortality, a decrease in cardiovascular disease mortality, and all of those really important outcomes that we care about. So, obviously gets a little more nuance from there about which specific thresholds, and we can talk some about that, but that's sort of the take home.
So the punchline is, it is a decent metric to track the amount you are actually moving, and has a direct impact on health span and lifespan.
Definitely.
Cool.
As always, it's important to really drive home the context. And so we're not talking about performance. We're not necessarily talking about VO2 max. This isn't the Peter Attia discussion.
Right.
Although you can use walking as a way to achieve zone 2.
Sure.
If we want to call it that. So, but again, just to distinguish, we are talking about longevity, but we're talking about ways that you can reduce mortality.
Yes.
And it's just that it's not 100% that walking is the only way to do that. Certainly if you prefer using a stationary bike, that's fine too.
Right.
But again, we have this really easy, crude way to measure movement. You get your steps up, we can pretty confidently say it's going to help people die less.
Right. Right.
That's essentially what's happening. So if we look specifically at a few studies, I think that'll help, drive home some of these points. Firstly, in the United States, adults are achieving roughly 5,100 to 6,500 steps per day.
Okay.
On average.
Is that good or bad?
So it's less.
It's the US, so I'm going to assume it's not great.
Right. And so that's, there's obviously much higher than that.
Sure, yeah.
But that cut point ends up being lower than what would ultimately be recommended to kind of hit the minimum to gain those added, cardiovascular benefits. And
what is the what's our target?
So I'll explain how the targets have changed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
There are, we could say 6,000 to 8,000.
Okay.
Is a good target.
Okay.
But certainly if you're surpassing that, that's fine too.
Yeah.
But there's really a lot more color there.
Okay.
Which is pretty wild. So one paper, the association of step volume and intensity with all-cause mortality in older women. It was a cohort study in 2019. They found that more steps taken per day are associated with lower mortality rates until approximately 7,500 steps per day. And the common theme here is around that 7,500, 7,000. We'll see it sort of a leveling off of the benefit.
Okay.
And so that's why the 10,000 step controversy thing comes back. So it's not that you don't 100% need 10,000 steps to achieve these associative benefits,
right,
so to speak. So that's one example. There was another study from August of 2021 Daily step count and all-cause mortality, a dose response meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies.
They have the best names.
They do. They're so easy to digest. Walking 16,000 steps per day was 16,000.
That's a lot.
So now we're talking the upper end of sort of, those.
Is that 5-6 miles a day almost?
It's more than that.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to Google it.
Yeah. So walking 16,000 steps per day was associated with a 66% reduction in all-cause mortality when compared to walking just 2,700 steps per day. And so that 2,700 is well below the average.
Yeah.
But that was sort of the lower quartile that was used in the cohorts from that study. So, I mean, there's plenty of people 2,000, 3,000 steps a day or less.
Yeah.
So it's just a interesting observation. The other interesting point from that study, rates of all-cause mortality were about 12% lower per 1,000 steps per day. So as you bump that number up by 1,000 from this study, you get this incremental
Decrease.
positive gain in reducing your
How long was the study? Did they say over what period of time?
So what they would do in a lot of these, and this was actually one of the limitations across the board, they would take a certain age group, let's say 20 to 60, and they would only track their steps for a week.
Oh.
They would track their steps for a week and then follow up with them, for example, in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But they would extrapolate the idea that they were still
moving,
walking 6,000 steps per day, walking 16,000 steps per day. They were operating under the assumption that our behaviors stay relatively maintained.
I wonder.
So that is a massive point that can't be understated. I don't think it throws these out the window.
Sure.
Because to the flip side, there are interventional studies that have looked at, groups of people that they've assigned walking protocols to, and we've seen health benefits, reduced blood pressure, increased VO2 max, increased 6-minute walk distance, decrease in BMI. So there's so many factors here. I know we're zeroing in on longevity. We're zeroing in on these associative studies, these observational studies. But when you start to pull things from all the different areas, it still points toward the direction of more steps, more health benefit.
Yeah.
But that's a great question because it highlights the massive, in my opinion, the biggest limitation.
There, obviously, we have all kinds of questions about privacy and security and all those things. But if we can look at a decade's worth of people consistently wearing accelerometers on their wrists and in their pockets and look at that data and compare it to, longevity and all those sorts of things, like we're going to have a lot better idea of what this means in a one-to-one sense in the next decade or two.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what I thought you were getting at when you were talking about demographics and seeing different people groups, because if you set up your profile on your phone, I'm a 36, 47-year-old male, my current weight is this, and you share that data.
Right.
And then it also is tracking how many steps, or if you have the fitness app or like all those things, then in a decade.
Yeah.
Per profile, per, ethnicity, age, weight, like all those things.
That's another interesting point. I think I don't have a great answer for that. You would assume that Apple, you would assume that Whoop, you would assume that Garmin, these big companies with tons of data, that they are using it in these research settings.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, it could help them sell more products in the long run, too, in addition to it driving policy change and, providing more clearly stated guidelines versus 100 to 150 minutes of moderate intensity, vigorous activity.
Right.
Instead, you say, you know what? As a starting point, 6,000 steps a day, 8,000 steps per day at this intensity, 100 steps per minute, equate, something a little more digestible, like if you're starting at page 1. What I potentially see as a hang up in using data from Whoop, data from Garmin, data from Apple, data from Fitbit, I don't believe that there's a standardized measurement across those devices.
Yeah.
They all might be incredibly accurate and they probably use similar technology.
Yeah.
But from what I read, at least from studies from 2015 to now, basically, is that they're still using those validated pedometers, those validated accelerometers that are not Whoop, that are not Apple. I think basically what has to happen is the FDA has to say this device is validated.
Right.
You know, just like Apple now introduced EKG and these other things to measure.
Yeah,
I think we're just chipping away at a lot of this stuff, chipping away at, okay, you know what? Across all these devices, the step counting function is validated. Now we can say, yes, this data can be extrapolated to a population level study. So I think until we get to that point, it might just be.
There is also the shortcoming of self-selection here.
Mm-hmm.
That the people that are going to be more likely to wear a wearable, especially a highly accurate one, probably are the ones
They're healthy to begin with.
more likely to engage in healthier activities to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say that this data won't be useful.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating.
So there was another study published March of 2022, daily steps and all-cause mortality. Just look how many there are.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like the same titles. Daily steps and all-cause mortality. I promise they're different. A meta-analysis of 15 international cohorts published, again, March 2022. There was also a research brief highlighted in one of the research companies that I subscribe to, Mass.
Okay.
They do more fitness-related stuff, but they highlighted this. Want to give them credit. Compared with adults in the lowest steps per day quartile, adults in the highest steps per day quartile had a 40 to 53% lower risk of mortality,
Okay.
which is substantial.
So in English, that means if you were in the top 25% of steps, you had a 40 to 50% lower risk of dying than those in the bottom 25%.
Exactly. And so that bottom quartile was again that 2,700-ish, 2,500, 2,000, depending on the paper. In that same study, there was progressively lower risk of mortality among adults aged 60 years and older until about 6,000 to 8,000 steps per day.
Okay.
And among adults younger than 60 until about 8,000 to 10,000.
Okay.
And so look, these are different papers.
Right.
And they're pointing in the same direction. The study that looked primarily at older women, the threshold seemed to be about 7,500.
Right.
There was the one paper that, 16,000 steps, shoot for the moon sort of thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're going to keep
I
realizing
looked it up.
benefit.
That's 7.5 miles, by the way.
7.5 miles of walking, which is a lot. Not everybody has time for that.
No.
That's a whole other thing. 6,000 to 8,000 steps per day, 8,000 to 10,000 steps per day. Now you can see, I think, where the sensible recommendation is.
Yeah.
Is it 6,500? That's great. 7,500, even better. 8,000, perfect.
Yeah.
10,000, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
But again, we see this sort of leveling off because again, and there's more to physical activity than walking.
I was just going to say,
this is one piece of the pie.
it seems like this is a base layer, and you can make that base layer as big and broad as you want. But at some point in time, if you want to gain more benefits, you're going to have to build on top of that through more vigorous activity.
Yeah.
Whether it's running or jogging or biking or swimming or rowing or lifting weights or something else, you need something on top of that to continue to build that health pyramid.
Yep. I don't want to lose sight of that theme. That's a huge, huge point. The last piece of that would be, it seems as though what's echoed in the media anyway, that kind of corroborates what these studies were showing, is that you can still see the health benefits. You can still see the mortality benefits at something less than this popularized 10,000 steps per day. And so I think that's a barrier for some people.
Yeah.
10,000 steps a day. I work 12-hour shifts and I'm mainly sitting at my desk.
Yeah.
I just had my hip replaced.
Yeah.
And how am I
yeah.
supposed to get 10,000 steps? That's ridiculous. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Dante has time for it, like that, that I can see that's a valid argument. Well, depending on where you sit, 4,000 steps is a day is a start.
Yep.
5,000 steps is a day is where you can shoot for. And so it's possible to attain tempered benefit below the 10,000 step threshold.
Yeah.
So there was one last study, which was just published March of 2023.
That is new.
Mm-hmm. this was a little nuanced. That's the only reason why I want to mention this one. It categorized participants into 3 groups according to the number of days per week that they took 8,000 steps or more.
Okay.
So they zeroed in on that cut point,
as
8,000
a minimum.
As a minimum.
Yep.
So they got that data from all the other ones that we just mentioned. All right, let's look at those who hit 8,000 steps on 0 days per week, 1 to 2 days per week, and 3 to 7 days per week.
Okay.
The all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality risk was lower as the days per week increased, but the protective association plateaued at 3 days per week. So again, we see this leveling off.
Makes sense.
It doesn't have to be 8 to 10,000, 20,000 steps a day, 7 days a week for the rest of your life, potentially. That's great because this is something that we can say more is better with exercise and moving around.
Yeah.
More is typically better. But again, 8,000 steps per day is a safe long-term goal. It doesn't have to be 7 days a week. 7 days a week is great, but we can see in this associative data that it sort of levels off. And I think we can have a whole separate discussion as to why that is.
Yeah.
But again, it just brings in the idea that you mentioned, improving your fitness, improving your health by way of physical activity.
Yeah.
It's this scaffolding process.
Yeah.
And so daily movement by way of tracking your steps indirectly can be a huge foundational layer. But then what's above that?
Right.
Maybe it's 1 day a week of resistance training. Then it's 2 days a week. Then it's 3 days a week. Who knows what happens to that plateau if you start resistance training 3 days a week? What if you start moving to minimally processed foods? You know what I mean? You start to, it's really fun and easy to look at these things in isolated conversations.
Right.
But who's to say, it's not that you just get this multiplied benefit. Then you become superhuman.
All you have to do is do your 10,000 steps and then you'll never die.
Right. Yeah. Or but if you do these 10,000 steps and you lift 3 days a week and you buy organic avocados,
then you won't die.
Be immortal.
Okay.
That's, that it doesn't
Immortality.
It doesn't reach that
work
point.
That way. Dang.
Yeah, but we're not done, believe it or not.
Oh my gosh. I hope you guys wanted to know about pedometers because we're telling you.
So now we mentioned, or we alluded to, again, some of these exercise science principles now.
Yeah.
Right? There aren't a ton of studies. There are some that look at what's the necessary walking speed, what's the necessary walking intensity. Now, depending on what the study is, one of the main ones concluded that as long as you're hitting the recommended step target, 6,000, 8,000, 7,500, doesn't matter how intense the steps were.
Okay.
So that baseline level of daily movement in 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 steps, as long as you're getting them in, that's most important.
Okay.
What does that sound like? Okay, you're starting to change your diet. Yes, we can tell you all these different food groups and this sort of thing, and this tastes better than that, and this is more optimal, and this has more fiber. Well, if you just focus on maybe calories in, calories out,
right,
learning how many calories was in that meal that you just ate, and that sort of thing, starting on a more basic level, it's very analogous to this.
Yeah.
Get the baseline number of steps in, just forget about the intensity at first, and as you scaffold those behaviors, you get better at it, you improve, then you can start to, add
worry
1,000.
about things.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Add some intensity, focus on your cadence. Those sorts of things come in later. That is the idea that we talk about with progressive overload, with specifically progressing resistance training, progressing conditioning by, if you're trying to improve your VO2 max, all of that still applies here. If you can only tolerate 1 to 2 minutes of walking,
right,
that's fine. That doesn't mean you
start
just blow.
there.
That doesn't mean you just don't do it
because
that's your entry point. But what that does mean is if 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day of walking is going to bump up your step count by like 2,000 steps a day is what the general recommendation is as far as like a stepwise approach. If you start there, ideally you don't stay there. So you want to still keep in mind that there's going to be
Progressive
overload. Yes, there's going to still have to be progressive overload. That doesn't mean you force it. And just because you've walked for 2 weeks that you increase your step count exorbitantly the next 2 weeks. You have to figure out what am I tolerating? Let those sort of adaptations occur. And then next thing you know, it's 4,000 becomes 6,000, 6,000 becomes 8,000. For me, it might take 6 months. For you, it might take 8 months. For you, it might take 24 months. It's very hard to nail that down, but you still have to keep in mind that there's still a progressive nature here. And yes, 1 minute bites, those exercise snacks, those are great. But again, you want to extend this out 1 minute to 5 minutes, 5 minutes to 15 minutes, and then 15 minutes becomes 30 minutes 4 times a week. That's what you have to see. It's not helpful to slap a specific time frame on it necessarily.
Okay.
I would say that hammers most of the big points. We talked about a lot of the limitations in the research. We talked about, progressing some of your progressing step counts, progressing physical activity in a very basic way. The interesting part that I, think might be useful to talk about, how am I now using step count? So before researching this, I had some vague idea of how many steps a day I was getting, but I was in the mindset of ignore it. I go to the gym. I do enough resistance training. I've done some CrossFit. And so I'm void of needing to pay attention to this step count. Well, my step count was lower than I would have thought. Some days if I didn't go out for a 30-minute, 40-minute walk, it's, 6,000 steps, 6,500 steps consistently over weeks and months. I think that is reflective, not to everybody, but that sector of people who have a sedentary lifestyle outside of the gym.
Sure.
Like there's so much more to the physical activity picture than what you're doing in the gym. And that's not that your life just becomes one big exercise party.
Right.
But you got to be moving around outside of the gym. There's tons and tons of health benefit up for grabs.
Yeah.
And so I have a smartphone. I'm using my watch. I'm looking at this more from a 50,000 foot view, not like over analyzing every day and like chopping up my steps to get them in.
Right.
But just looking at this from a 50,000 foot view to say, hey, you know what? You have been hitting it hard in the gym. That's great. Keep doing it. But you're still at 6,000 steps a day. Do you think that it might be useful to shift gears and might be useful to, say, hey, what are you doing at 6 o'clock when you get home from work?
Yeah.
Could you add a project at the house that keeps you moving?
Yeah.
Could you go outside and play with the neighbors and your nieces and nephews and the neighbor kids and all that kind of stuff? Something to use your fitness, but also increase your activity outside of the gym.
We just got a dog, and that has been an excellent excuse to get out and get more steps because that dog is far more athletic than I am. So
DiMatteo Senior used to say that all the time.
Yeah.
Get a dog. If you don't have a dog, I'll get you a dog. He'd say it all the time. He's like, get a dog, walk the dog, like get outside.
We're not buying you dogs.
No.
But you should still get one. They're great. Finding other ways to keep, other reasons to keep moving other than just, I have to get my steps.
Yeah. Sedentary behavior is its own independent risk factor.
Yep.
For different disease states, different outcomes.
Yeah.
And there's benefit to moving and continuing to move, even if it's not at LA Fitness.
Fair enough.
And so the last thing is it 7,500 steps a day? Is it 6,000 steps a day?
What is the rest?
Is it 8,000?
What is it, Dante? Give me the truth.
Drum roll.
8,000? They shoot for 8,000 steps a day.
Question mark?
Definitely. I think shoot for 8,000 steps a day as a longer term goal.
Yeah.
Once you're in a position, aim to increase your step count by 2,000 to 2,500 steps a day.
Wherever you're at,
eventually shoot for that goal.
Over the course of a year.
Mm-hmm. And now what we can say is we are less intimidated by the 10,000 steps per day goal.
That's awesome.
It's meaningful below that.
Let's talk about Halloween real quick, since today is the day.
Yeah, I forgot.
No, come on.
I got to do a lot of walking.
I got nothing to add here because
Because you don't do
if
Halloween?
I open the bag of Halloween candy that I buy from the store before I even get home.
Oh, you bad boy.
And then you have nothing to hand out to all the little children.
Confessions. We just wanted to offer a few quick pointers to help make Halloween slightly less of a disaster area when it comes to diet and kids and adults. Dante, what have you got? What's worked for you with your kids?
As far as limiting how much candy,
Sure.
we do the whole neighborhood and then some.
Yeah.
And
So you guys get mountains.
He's
Yeah,
got industrial
ton.
scales at his house to measure each pile.
For the listeners, we have 4 boys, so they each get their own bag full, and then they bring it home. And then after I don't know if you do this, but we do this where we divvy the types of candy in their own pile. So all the Reese's get here, all the Snickers get put here, everybody, it all gets divvied up into the
Sounds
separate
like such
category.
a waste of time.
Definitely
I know.
not.
I don't know why. There's no health benefit to that or decreased risk of mortality. So I don't know why we do that.
I think that'll help for sure.
Anyway, so what we do with the candy is we, after we divvy it up, we actually pack up bags to give away to other people. So,
Yes.
So my sister-in-law, she's a flight attendant, and on flights with other flight attendants, she'll give like goodie bags of the stuff that we've packed up to give to them, and they love it. So figuring out a way that's like, hey, you get to keep this amount, but the other stuff we're actually gonna give.
You just make other people unhealthy.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's
no.
if it's
Hopefully,
not me, it's somebody else.
hopefully it's other people that have a little more self-control. I actually wanted to call that out. There are several charities that you can look at. I think it's called Operation Shoebox, Halloween Candy Buyback. A lot of dentists do that as like promotion. Yeah. Where you bring the dentist your excess candy, and for every whatever pound, they either give you $1 or
And they just like throw it in a bonfire. Out
Yeah.
back.
No. They donate it to these different charities. First responders a lot of times get this sort of thing. Children's hospitals. You can take the Ronald McDonald House. I know they always take candy, because any place where kids have to be in less favorable circumstances, something like that is a big hit. Mm-hmm. So yes, giving away a big portion of it. We have 4 kids as well, and thankfully they don't all trick or treat with me anymore because they're in college and they're gone. But the 2 that do, it gets to be a little insane. And yeah, we set the expectation early and often. You will not be eating everything you bring home. That's not going to happen. Just to be clear, it's not going to happen.
Yep.
They got to start eating on the road.
They do, and that's acceptable. We allow the rule in our house is like, you get one night of gorging yourself, you'll feel awful. Thankfully, we sorry, Wyatt, I'm telling the story. We have one son that if he would eat too much sugar, he would vomit 100% of the time. It was great.
Valuable lesson.
Because once we figured out what was going on, we could then be like, Wyatt, stop eating candy because you don't want to puke. And he always had to. And it was great.
We do the same thing. We say like, hey, here's the amount you'll eat for this evening.
Yep.
And like, that's it. And then everything else we keep.
Do you?
Like up in a cabinet. They don't get just to keep the bag in there.
Age it.
Yeah. Take it out of the bedrooms because
Correct.
there is no control when it is not.
You find wrappers underneath the bed, all kind of crazy stuff. No, we keep that completely separate from
I mean, October through the new year is just devastating.
Oh, it's
with food, with seasonal foods and sweets,
Yeah.
and candy. I mean, I love it, but it's just insane. It's just month after month of like, you know what? It's seasonal. I could do it for this season.
This year,
and then it's
we're gonna help you.
Pumpkin and cinnamon and nutmeg and eggnog to candy apple lollipops.
We're
Like,
here for you this year. We're not
you know,
going to
we
let
were
that
at a-
happen. Are you one of those
once
weirdos
those-
that
once
likes
those-
candy corn?
oh no.
You know what? What I'll say about candy corn
What will you say about candy corn?
is that it's objectively terrible.
It's a bad
But because
candy.
people put it out from September through November, you're like, you know what? I'm down for anything seasonal.
Okay.
I really am, even if it's terrible candy corn. I mean, it's all part of
I
it.
can't.
This is people are not going to listen to us about anything now. I hope you guys are enjoying
They
this.
may have
There's
like
basically
this more.
there's nothing you can do. It's Halloween and
There's
it's gonna
nothing
be
you can do. No.
it's gonna be a ridiculous night.
Yeah,
Everyone's gonna be
the ridiculous night is fine, but beyond that, get the stuff out of the house. Don't keep it around. Set expectations. Do things like You can only eat it at meal times.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some people I have some friends that do that. You have to eat your meal and then you can have a piece of candy. Okay. All right. 2 more quick thoughts. Number 1, we would, consistently, because we have Boy Scouts, so there's lots of campfires, lots of s'mores as a result. We would always pull out the Reese's peanut butter cups and save those for s'mores in lieu of buying other chocolate. We just save that. That's what we're going to do. Another thing you can do is pull out candy that is going to be used on a gingerbread house later on. You can't eat that candy because it's gross when it's on a gingerbread house.
The dots.
It's like one of those
The
peanuts.
dots.
It's like one of those candy peanuts.
Anything. It really doesn't matter. Just pull some out that you intend to use for that. So it's set aside and you can't get into it.
So you set candy aside for gingerbread
Exclusive
houses.
future uses. The other thing we would do is
I like
set
that. It's a seasonal.
Yeah, see?
Seasonal.
It's not wasted, it's just not eaten. And the other thing, the other thing we would do is have like an expiration date, air quotes, expiration date on all candy. Like if it's whatever, December 3rd and it's not gone, we're throwing it away.
Yeah,
It's
by the new
Basically,
year.
by the new year, it's pretty much
Yeah.
anthrax.
If it gets to the new year, it is not edible. So that worked for us. Good luck, guys. If you have any tips or
Indeed.
suggestions, drop them below.
Godspeed to all of you.
We would love to hear. This has been chaos, much like Halloween. All right.
Wear your wearable trick-or-treating this evening.
yeah.
Get your 8,000 steps.
Get your steps in, but
That's
don't use
right.
that to justify your
Yeah, because the
chocolate
calories that it's telling you you're burning,
Yeah.
it's probably fake news.
It's true. Like one little tiny candy bar, those little bite-sized ones, that's probably about 800 steps.
Yeah,
Maybe
and you end
less.
up eating more of the fun size,
Yeah.
the fun size ones than you would do a regular
For
size bar.
for each
Oh my
little
gosh.
baby candy bar you eat, just run in place super fast in between houses.
All the products, none of which we mentioned today, are available on our website. That is askjoedimatteo.com, AskJoedimatteo.com. That is also where you can sign up for our newsletter so you can keep up to date with what we're doing when we have big sales. New episodes of this show, past episodes of the original show, the Ask Joe DiMatteo show, all available there on our website. Go check that out. If you have any questions, we would love to hear about them. Questions at askjoedimatteo.com is how you can get a hold of us. Show notes, anything that we referenced, all the studies, the 47 different studies that this man researched for the wearables segment.
Thank
those
you,
are-
Dante.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dante.
I'm about to just throw on my Da Vinci wearable and call it a day.
That's
A lot
fair.
of research there. Thank you.
All of those will be down in the show notes below, so check those out. And if you want to help us out, if you learned something, please leave a comment, leave a thumbs up, subscribe, like, share it with people that you know, other folks that need to hear these things. Maybe not the second half of this show. That was a complete train wreck, but
It was beautiful.
we love you guys. Thank you so much. Mr. Dante DiMatteo, Mr. Josiah Schweinberg. The other people that we got to thank: Michael Depesh, our editor; Joyce Gibb, the nurse practitioner who handles private consultations; Diane Silverman, who handles product; Terry, who does scheduling; Cecilia, who does distribution. I already thanked you. I'm Tyler Andrews. Good luck.